Christopher Joseph Hawke, on behalf of my two grandsons, the grandchildren of Tuvalu in the middle of the Pacific, and the grandchildren of some Aboriginal people I was sitting with the other night, and also the social justice awareness group of the local Catholic Church here in Alice Springs, part of the Our Lady of the Sacred Heart Alice Springs community.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
I'd like to share my concerns based on, I have extra copies of it if you wish. Fracking has no social licence yet, statement that we made in November 2015. And through an oversight, I sent it to the wrong department and not to you specifically as an inquiry, and I was told this was the opportunity to share some of that. And so I'll read the relevant section, since you haven't got it in front of you, that I'd like to address.
Has it been submitted to the inquiry?
Yeah.
It has been submitted.
No. So what happened was it went to the government, went to the wrong department. And
we're not the government, you know that.
I know that. I made the mistake. Thank you.
All right. Well, if by all means, read out whatever you wish, but so that we have, and this is why I'm asking you these questions, so that we have the complete copy of the document, just hand a spare copy to any of those people sitting at the table just behind you on your way out. They're the inquiry task force, and then it'll be treated as a submission and loaded onto the website.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who monitors fracking operations? Will the monitors include those who do not support fracking to ensure wider community confidence, transparency and social licence to operate? Will there be unrestricted 24/7 access to fracking sites? Will there be pre- and post-tests of all water, soil and air testing to be publicly available? Will this cover the actual chemicals used? Is there an independent umpire or review body with no conflict of interest? Are there strong legal sanctions to prosecute violations without delay? Will whistleblowers within companies, government or wider community be supported by legislation? Can government employees or those in contracts share their views without risk of retribution? How do we contaminate underground water and who pays for it? Are rural and remote Northern Territory landowners and communities being made sacrifice zones for the short-term business or government benefit? Who pays the increased costs from climate change increases? So these are all part of the bigger question of who benefits and who loses in Central Australia and around our world, now and in the future, from fracking Northern Territory gas. When will we transition to a cheaper, healthier, renewable energy economy, if not now? Let's carefully consider how we change our world before it changes us. So that's the core of the statement and the core of what I'm saying. So I'd like to take the time to explore some of the implications of that. I spoke with my parish council last night, and they're aware that I'm talking with you briefly this morning. And 2 nights ago, I sat around a campfire with 10 Aboriginal leaders who are not in the position for me to publicly name them here for a whole range of reasons. A number of them are under leaders of consequence. And one of the things that they shared was, how do we talk to the white decision makers about our land? And the concept of land and their connection with the land is not about dollars and $50 notes and how much money you can get out of the rocks at the bottom, but it's a whole relationship which you've documented well, which is great. I really support your move to get a lot more information and more connection with them. The emptiness of that group in terms of how do we communicate who we are and feel part of this process with you as a representative body who is making recommendations to the leadership that we elected in this Northern Territory, left them speechless. And there was a silence and some tears in that group about that inner conflict and how we deal with it. It was reflected, I've worked as a mental health specialist on an Aboriginal community for 8 years, dealing with really difficult issues. And at one level, there's a lot of deeper unresolved issues with our relationship with Aboriginal people that this becomes another little flashpoint with, and we need to explore and be aware of. And And if we're talking about long-term change, it's about that relationship and how we move forward with them. And there's almost there's very little point of access there in that relationship with people and how they make decisions and we make decisions. And the consequences of the recommendations you make will either feed in towards the healing or the not of it. As I've only partly read and not fully understood a lot of the details that you people have put together, and thank you for your efforts, I've become really aware that the devil is in the detail, but as a Christian, I'd rather hope that in the detail is the common ground or the common good, that the common ground is in the detail. But there's a widespread lack of confidence that government will make decisions on behalf of the majority, not only of Aboriginal people, but of the wider community. I helped door knock part of the electorate, this local electorate I'm in, which the previous Chief Minister was in, and it was amazing when you had the time to sit and talk beyond the spin and the rhetoric and the public debate, how much common ground there was about this not happening. So it's not about finding a way to make it economically happen for the short-term benefits of the community, it's about the long-term issue. And even people one was a miner who fully supported it and said, we're just a mob of ratbags. And after half an hour of talking, he began to see that there were really important issues here. How do we create that space for the future? And I think it's really important that somehow you reflect that in your decisions. The current water and power, for example, have you got results of all the fracking that's been done on water? Has the water of those fracking wells been tested at the well site and around the well site? And is that publicly available? And will that be available in the future? And so often commercial and confidence arguments then prevent people, and are people able to access that at 24/7? And I have this image of Aboriginal elders or people who don't support the fracking who have permission to have access at any time, and perhaps with some rules like a camera on them so that everything they do is visualised, and maybe it's taken to an independent supplier person that camera is instantaneous so that they can go and look and check at what's happening. I've met and talked to people working in the mining industry who are subcontractors to reputable companies, and they talk about the things that happen on the ground, workers taking shortcuts and not doing it effectively. And that happens in all industries and all governments, and my church is as in a good example of some of the failings that we've got. We need to have really clear regulation of how to do that, and it's almost unenforceable here in the Territory. And that's a realistic thing. It's just impossible. I drive these things out to Kintor and whatever, and it's just almost impossible to arrive at a mine site unannounced to check that something's happening correctly. And because it's almost unenforceable, and because you can't undo what's done, that's something we need to look at. I often reflect on it's a bit like the asbestos thing. Asbestos when I was growing up was the ants' pants, fire resistant, good for us, and then we discovered that it kills people. The government resisted, the company, Hardy, resisted at all costs, and a lot of public people resisted. Now the community has come around, and we realise that this unseen thing in asbestos is killing people. And it's almost in the air. This is the third thing. The air, the land and the water is what we're trying to protect for my grandchildren and our grandchildren here and around the world. Or it's another image that I find useful is it's a bit like the cane toad decision. With the best of will, the scientific decision was made to release that into the community, and we're still suffering the consequences. Or it's a bit like the Maralinga decision. The government, without a lot of community consultation, agreed with the British government to conduct the tests. And we've had one of their leading advocates recently pass away in this fair city. They are images that help me to stay focused on supporting that change. Silence. Is there anything that you want to ask or make comment about?
Are you finished with your presentation? Because we'll save our questions till the very end.
Oh, is there questions after you give me the zero, the 10, or the questions are part of the half an hour?
Yes.
They're part of it, okay.
Yes.
I'll ask questions now. I have lots more information, but I think...
Well, we will wait till after your presentation, so please say everything you wish to say, and then we'll ask you questions. Thank you.
I was stunned to discover that I'd been removed for the previous election, the Northern Territory election, as a worker in the Northern Territory Electoral Commission. I'd been working for years, and it turns out that I'd written a letter to the paper about fracking, and someone in the government department said, gave my name to the person in charge of the department, and Ian has verified this, as someone who had made public statements that were a political electoral issue. And I've since discovered that he has the power to not employ people because of their position publicly. Now, I'd been through the whole process of updating all my stuff, and I was told that it was just a matter of them letting me know. And I was stunned to discover I wasn't employed. And of course, they have no need, they don't have to legally say why. He, in the end, in writing, has apologised to me for not letting me know. Ian has done the right thing. I've since discovered that there are inbuilt processes in the department that I think are very fairly protect what happens in the public. But the dilemma is that the way in which decisions get made inadvertently can work against change or particular groups in the department, in the community. And that's one of my concerns about how decisions get made around this issue as well. And for example, so what's I'm now asking the department to be, I'm talking through the Chief Minister and my local member, about getting a lot clearer about how are those decisions made within there. Like, was anyone, that the person in his department, in the electoral NTEC, Northern Territory Electoral Commission, who found my name off a newspaper article, was that person also scanning for people who supported fracking and had written letters to the paper saying the economic benefits and whatever? Or were the key words of their due diligence test only about no fracking, which is a negative image that reflects the position I come from? And did they also key in and use the due diligence test on all the other employees, reflecting the other view? I have no issue with having it as long as the rule is applied fairly. And so one of the reactions I have is, does that mean if people speak up in town about an issue that the current government or people in government departments don't accept, that we will not get work in the future? And that's a powerful incentive. That's a powerful influence in the Northern Territory, where if you haven't got a job, you can't pay to stay, and you often need to move back somewhere else. And I use that as an example of what needs to be thought through, that even the best legislation in the world can be, now maybe they were quite correct in their process, or maybe the government of the day was able to influence the process, which in a sense I felt I was discriminated against in terms of employment. Anyway, that's a specific example I think that we need to be really careful of. And that, for me, is an example that leads into the lack of public confidence in the whole, and those who support hydraulic fracturing and making a lot of money at the moment from it. I support people making money, but it needs to be done in a healthy way. I actually want to really support the renewable energy model community. And we need to be putting all our money into jobs for that. And over 80%, something like 95% of Territorians want renewable energy. And the short-term, thank you, the short-term benefits of this, most people don't want. And applying what happened to me in another wider context, I have been working with various government departments over many years, and when I'm representing that department, I don't talk about things that are part of my role. And there are a lot of people for example, a lot of people in positions of influence in this town who really don't want fracking but won't say anything because of their jobs. And probably all of you are in the same boat. You've got a position where you have to publicly, your role is to be a public commissioner here, and you're not supposed to say yay or nay or wherever you are. And that's one of my concerns, that and there's a public confidence, there's a perception that the political process is being undermined. It was clearly an election issue. There was a change of government. The people of the Northern Territory clearly don't want it in the majority. And yet here we have a process set up by you, and you're part of it with integrity, you're all part of this process, which in the long term could undermine the very democratic principles that we're setting up. So I'm really glad that that at least I have the opportunity to share with you. My concern is that the business of decision-making and of government can be undermined by the processes that are either in place or not in place. Look, I'd like to leave it at that. I find it really hard to just talk with people. That's the end. Let's take the last few minutes for questions.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Hawke. I just wanted to better understand. I think your suggestion is that this process, this inquiry, is undermining the democratic process. How is that? Given that my understanding is, and I don't live in the Territory, that the now government of the Northern Territory went to the election with a promise to, if it got into power, enact a moratorium, or not enact a moratorium, but put in place a moratorium and set up this inquiry process. So how are we undermining? How is this process, given that it appears to be consistent with what the government is doing, undermines the democratic process?
There's a really positive side to this process where I'm at least getting the chance to air it. Often what happens is the series Yes Minister showed this dynamic often, and you yourself have said in the report that you're not telling them what to do, you're just providing a report and government will decide what they want. And a lot of public believe that commissions like this, a number of people said, I'm wasting my time coming here, because in the best of will, you'll do your job, which is to write down all the different views and make recommendations, which can be totally ignored by the government, and they can go ahead and do what they want. So the weakness of the process is exactly that. And so that it becomes, this is just a public spin charade where we'll get the chance to come and vent our spleens or say something that's legitimate. But the actual decision-making process at the end of the day is influenced heavily by the politics of the day, which is a short-term political survival for many of them, or it's short-term economic benefits. And so there is a lot of benefit in fracking in the short term, mostly for the people of companies and shareholders whom we're not sure who they are, and that money will go overseas. And that's my concern, is so that the overall process, the context in which you are all operating as an inquiry in the broader political and global context can be undermined.
That I understand. So you're not impugning the integrity of this inquiry.
Like you're doing, I hope you're being really honest and doing your job. From what I see, you're doing what you're asked to do. It's one of the do is you limit the inquiry. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about Tuvalu is the country. I was also talking with someone last night at the parish council, and he is from Fiji. Father Russ probably wouldn't mind me saying, and he's a leader in his Fiji, in his place. They've put aside land for the people of Tuvalu to come and live there when their land is uninhabitable. The Australian government's not even thinking about the economic refugees, which is one of the implications of fracking. Every ounce of that gas, wherever it ends up in the world, will be burnt and contribute to climate change. Every ounce of it, which will contribute to further extreme weather issues. Now, that's not part of your brief as such. You've got a much narrower brief looking at that. But fortunately, it was expanded to include something of that. So that's part of my plea. So it's the grandchildren of Tuvalu and Father Russ's family who will be inconvenienced by extra economic environmental refugees coming to his home. But he's here and sharing his life with us here in Alice Springs, and I think it's lovely. We're a global community, and as such, you can contribute to that. Hence my real desire that we move it in from an issue of how do we accept the minimal consequences, which seems to be the direction of the report. I think you've said something either way, but the way it looks like the predominant feeling from most of the discussion at the public level is we'll name it as acceptable consequences and go ahead with it. And I think that would be disastrous. Anyone else?
Any further questions, comments? Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, look, thanks, Mr. Hawke. I want to go back to a comment you made at the start of your presentation about your discussions with senior Aboriginal people and how they were feeling disengaged and not clear how they can engage with this essentially white-fellow sort of process. And I'm sure you know that the land councils are set up specifically to do that. That is their function. And I just wondering the extent to which you think the people you were speaking with appreciated that is the process for them to engage.
Yep, exactly. And in my perception, there are three groups that really benefit particularly from fracking. The companies that will make the most money out of it. Most of those will be their shareholders wherever they live, wherever they are in the world. The government has a real benefit, and part of my concern is that the government has a conflict of interest. They stand to gain political, economic credibility as managers by allowing it to go ahead because it'll help balance the economy. And the economy of the Northern Territory is in trouble, and our reliance on impact and the short-term developmental phase where there are lots of jobs is similar. We're doing the same. This will provide lots of jobs in the short term, but once it's set up, it's minimal employment to continue it. And I lost your point. Where am I?
Yes, about
the landowners. Yes. So, and the third group, the politics, and the third is the traditional owners. And yes, there is a structure by which the traditional owners have some feedback. The current legislation is that virtually they have to be consulted. They have no power to say no to mining. That rests with the government on your and your recommendations can influence that. And part of there's a deep frustration where there's not an issue for them to say no to it. The issue is, well, we have to have dialogue. And so what's the dialogue become? It becomes about money. And there's a tension within some communities where some of the traditional owners will end up getting, we hopefully, and that again is your recommendation as to the model, whether they get royalty money right up front or only when the company makes a profit. But a number of communities struggle because their traditional owners will end up with extra four-wheel drives and economic benefits, some of which will be shared really fairly, some of which just for their own family. And so it creates tensions in Aboriginal communities that I know of and have experienced there. But most of them, and including, and I've talked with some of the people at depth who are actually TOs who get royalty money and who will benefit from this, they also are deeply concerned about what we're doing for the land. And for them as leaders, they're struggling because they're economically in positions where there are very few jobs and their economy doesn't work well for them. And part of my thing as the social justice person is to support the people, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And people in remote Aboriginal communities are part of the poor. And their leadership is struggling. And so within communities, what does a leader do? Here's the mining company coming with big dollars and big bickies offering that, which is good. And so they'll get some short-term benefits, but at the price of their long-term water supply. And what is the plan? There was no plan about what happens if their community water supply gets destroyed. And we have another unintended consequence like the Maralinga fallout that was Mr. Lester was unaware of when he was part of that process. Like the frogs, cane toads, thank you. Yeah, so that's complex at that level, and yes, there are some benefits for them in the short term. Most of them, when they're talked to, want a stronger relationship. It's not just about them. So the dilemma is it's about dollars. Many of them want a good relationship with us. And this group I was talking with had a strong spiritual base, and many of us are realising there's a spiritual issue here. That is, a deeper meaning issue about how we relate to one another. And this is just another flashpoint of, well, how are we going to relate to Aboriginal people? How do we consult with them? How do we sit with them when they're feeling? And she almost came with me this morning. I was trying to get some of them to come with me, but this is very daunting to speak with you. How do they share not only the pain of their stolen generation and all those issues we know well, but their love of the land and their love of relationship and people in terms with a group of people who are only talking about whether to make dollars out of the gas that will have some benefit for some mostly fly-in, fly-out workers. It's all part of a complex, bigger picture in which a poor or oppressed people find it really hard. And yes, their decision-making framework is very limited, The land councils and even the land councils are structured so, and the land councils themselves have a vested interest in royalties because they take a percentage to keep themselves going. And so there's a network of self-interest in things that can undermine the long-term benefit for the communities they actually represent.
Thank you. It's now 9 o'clock. Thank you very much for attending today, Mr. Hawke. Appreciate it's daunting, but we're very grateful that you've made the effort and the time today and time out of your busy day, and we're very appreciative for engaging with the inquiry and the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.